Going to go ahead and get started here with the coordinator training for the point-in-time survey and housing inventory. I know a lot of this material is already familiar to most of you. So on to the second slide, roles for the survey. The local point-in-time coordinators, as of last year, which we've talked about before, are in charge of the unsheltered or street count and service sites, and also helping to identify new facilities. We at the CoC are, in most cases, there are some exceptions, but dealing directly with the shelters or facilities and have a contact person at that place for the pit count and then working with the housing inventory. So that's the basic structure of things. A little bit about the unsheltered or the street counts. We will send surveys and confidentiality agreements to all of you local coordinators, as well as providing the training. I sent out an email earlier asking people to confirm mailing addresses and the number of surveys that we should send. So if you haven't received that, look for that. I know we had some places last year where we had to guess a little bit on the number of surveys, and we got some feedback that we, may be way off in certain cases. So we're trying to just hone in on that a little bit and sharpen our distribution list. Local coordinators identify unsheltered sites and come up with canvassing plans, identify service sites, recruit and train interviewers, distribute surveys and confidentiality agreements, collect surveys and agreements, and return surveys to the Montana CoC. With the shelters, we are working on facility inventory and contact list, but any help with new facilities in particular, as I mentioned before, is appreciated. We will direct, coordinate, and train facility contacts. We're also working on verifying housing inventory data, pit count, utilization rates, printing and shipping surveys, and confidentiality agreements. And then the facilities will return these directly to us with the CoC. Issues and questions. New shelters identified, street counts and canvassing. Street count and shelter overlap. Some communities tally before returning. Project Homeless Connect issues. Any other issues or questions? The training dates are on the slide. I'm on slide number 6 now. We also have all the training dates posted on the website, montanacoc.org. Volunteer interviewers can see the website for that. We also have a link to the volunteer interviewer training video. And people should know, too, that if we need to, we can definitely schedule one-on-one times for groups if none of the times that we have currently scheduled accommodate people's schedules. We're trying to keep everything all the information that's going out should be posted onto the website. So on slide number 7, the importance of the training is that it does have a direct impact on data quality. Opportunity to remedy survey and housing inventory weaknesses, try to pick up essential PIT data and HI utilization rates. It is part of the score in the grants competition. And one of the things that we try to do is document the training, the number of people, and what the manner of training was. And we just try to keep track of that and ask for people to send that in February along with the surveys. And if you could, please include an estimate of the number of volunteers. Slide number 8, housing inventory. This slide is basically just the main housing types that are covered under the housing inventory: emergency shelters, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing. Housing inventory criteria: beds must be dedicated to homeless persons. And the definition of that is basically that the primary intent is to serve people experiencing homelessness, verify status as a part of eligibility determination, and clients are predominantly homeless, or for permanent housing, we're homeless at entry. Slide 10, a little more about the housing inventory process. I have sent out information to the local coordinators and to the facilities with the housing inventory information that we have from last year, and asking people to review that and either verify, yes, this is all correct, or send any changes. Slide 11, what I just said. And then the date on that is February 15th that we would like to have those back by. Why do we do the survey As we all know, this is nationwide simultaneous basis for report to Congress and funding. Also a requirement for the grants, in part to raise public awareness, local and statewide planning, and factoring into other grant writing. On slide number 13 now, this is about the overall goals of the survey, which are coverage, consistency, and accuracy. Elements of success include statewide coordination, volunteer recruitment, site ID and coverage, and 100% of the housing inventory sites is what we're shooting for, as well as outside street sites. And then the statewide and local trading. The survey this year on slide 15 is on January 31st, continuing a emphasis on trying to identify homeless youth and to work with organizations that serve them, bringing that group more into the PIT survey. And then the confidentiality agreements are also a big part of it. Basically, the confidentiality agreements are stipulating that client information is confidential, that surveys will be protected and kept out of view, and that no one knowingly enters inaccurate information. And like I said before, we'll send out the confidentiality forms with the survey. Yeah, the January 31st is the date. And as usual, the deal is sunset on the 31st, sunrise on February 1st. About 80% of the effort takes place during that time. It's important to not do any surveys before January 31st. And the service site surveys, if anyone has a question what I mean by that, let me know. The service site surveys, but those run through February 7th. On slide 18, there's a little graphic that kind of just visualizes what I was just talking about the span of time for the survey, the unsheltered count. In most cases, not all, starts after shelter doors close and completed before sunrise. The sheltered facilities, typical arrangement would be to start the surveys when all the residents are in for the night and complete before they leave in the mornings. A little bit about planning the unsheltered count. This is just kind of a suggested overview of method. Local CoC, local PIT coordinators and CoC coordinators retrieve last year's plan, update sites and locations, recruit volunteers, interviewers, assign locations, and provide training. The unsheltered, the definition, according to HUD, is the primary nighttime residence is a place not meant for habitation, such as on the street, under a bridge, in a camp, park, vehicle, bus station, or abandoned structure. Service sites are considered a part of the unsheltered count, and therefore, as I mentioned earlier, a part of the project that is headed by the local PIT coordinators, meant to capture unsheltered persons who were missed on the night of PIT, who may have been sleeping in remote areas or come into town for services. Food banks, thrift stores, HRDC, Salvation Army, churches, other places like that where people who didn't get counted in the survey might show up in the week following the PIT count. Planning shelter counts. The Montana CoC coordinates working with a facility coordinator, a person on site, to establish a plan about when, the process for interviewing, any special events or incentives, training, recruiting, scheduling interviewers, and someone on site to oversee and answer questions, which is highly recommended, of course, and someone to help verify the PIT count and housing inventory information. The question of who fills out the survey, the highest response rate and accuracy comes from having an interviewer who has been trained to do the surveys, obviously. Homeless person, him or herself with assistance, is considered the next best option. And in cases where a case manager knows that a client can't or won't fill out the survey, that is the third option, to have the case manager fill out the survey on behalf of the client. And this graphic on slide 25 just kind of illustrates the three different types. Interviewers. So for unsheltered, current or formerly homeless persons, homeless people who work with homeless programs, CoC veterans, outreach workers, PATH. For shelters, again, current or former homeless and outreach workers, residents, case managers, and train volunteers. A little bit about interviewer training. The top link on slide 27 is to the interviewer training video, which is hosted on YouTube. Also, the recommendation is to practice the questions with a dry run. The more that an interviewer knows the questions, the higher the comfort level in gaining the trust of the respondent and getting better responses. And then just recommended that talking about patience for it being a 10-minute interviewer be part of the training. Basics: use only pen or number 2 pencil because of the scanner, no felt tip markers. We interview one person per household, which we try to have be the head of the household, whatever that means in that specific case. We don't survey every member in a family. Fill in the oval. We don't want to use X's or checks, and write only where indicated on the survey. Frequently asked questions and issues that come up, and these are just kind of the standard responses to those things. But the idea that it's a bad time of year to do the survey, but it's the same survey date is designated across the country, so that's why we do it when we do it. The question of whether or not it's necessary to answer all the questions, and what we say is that we want to ask all of the questions, but the answers are voluntary. Gender and ages are required for the survey, but these are things for which observation is allowed if necessary. The objection can arise that some of the questions are too personal, and that, again, it kind of defaults back to the respondent having the power to choose which questions they do or do not wish to answer. And the concern about the need to define homelessness is, the response to that is that we don't actually need to have a definition because the survey accommodates all definitions. Slide 30, this is just some sample words about the ask, approaching someone about the survey. So I'm going to read a little bit here. Would you be willing to help us with a statewide survey regarding homelessness? All answers are confidential, anonymous, and voluntary. Answer only the questions that you want. These things in bold here are kind of the most important ones. Just say pass to skip a question. And also important is communicating to the respondent that participating in the survey or not will not result in a denial of services. And kind of generally, the survey helps us understand needs in our community. Going into some nitty-gritty about the survey itself, the first thing that we're going to talk about a little bit is the front page facility identification. Question number 4, the where slept question, is sort of linked to that. It needs to match what's on the front page of the survey. Chronic homeless, we'll talk about in a minute. The respondent identifier box, which is the demographic information on inside right-hand page. The household demographics table, which is the back page. And finally, we'll go into some detail here about the disability question. The facility identification on the front of the survey is only to be filled out by sheltered facilities. If people are doing street unsheltered surveys out in the streets or the parks or whatever, that front page identifier box should be ignored. There should be nothing filled in there. But it is a must for all sheltered surveys, and facilities can get counted as not participating if we don't have that identifier box information filled out on the front. Talking a little bit about question 4 now. Where were you sleeping on the night of January 31st? Unsheltered. We need to ask where they are sleeping. Person might be outside, but later planning to sleep on a friend's couch, for example. So for the sheltered facilities, also, again, need to verify that they are sleeping here in this shelter tonight. And for the service site, it becomes past tense, of course. Where did they sleep on January 31st? Still talking about question number 4. The friends or family option, the important thing is to try to determine whether it's voluntary and an intended short duration. Involuntary for a long duration would be the other part of that. The motel or hotel with the vouchers, there's a couple of different options in question 4, whether they're paying for it by themselves or if it's being paid for by a voucher of some kind. This is another area where it gets a little sticky sometimes sorting out, because the people who fill out the surveys, it seems like they can determine that this person is staying in a motel, but they don't always have the information about what agency is, paying for that voucher. And that's the part that can kind of get things a little confused with that. And then finally, apartments or house with a subsidy or apartment or house rented or owned by self. That's just kind of a walkthrough of those different options there. Slide 35, the length of time homeless questions. I think the thing here is that they can get a little confusing. And so it sometimes seems necessary to sort of help the respondent decode the question a little bit. Just taking a look at those and making sure that the interviewer is clear on what those are asking. And then the disability. When collecting data on disability status for the PIT count, CoCs must ensure that volunteers administering the survey know the questions that must be asked of all persons being surveyed, and that it is completely voluntary whether persons respond to questions about disability status. And persons being surveyed are informed prior to responding to any disability question that their response is voluntary and their refusal to respond will not result in a denial of service. What is a disability? A physical, mental, or emotional impairment, including an impairment caused by alcohol or drug abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, or brain injury that is expected to be long-continuing or of indefinite duration, substantially impedes the individual's ability to live independently, and could be improved by the provision of more suitable housing conditions. The identifier information, this is now referring to, on slide 38, this is referring to the box where we collect the people's name, first initial of their last name, and the day of their birthday, which ideally we get all three. That's kind of the main linchpin of the deduplication, is that set of information. Also, again, just a reminder that the respondent, if possible, is the head of household. And then a little bit about the demographics table. This would be for the accompanying members on the back of the form. There's a question on number 16 on the inside that asks how many adults and children are in the household. Ideally, that number equals the respondent plus all of the people whose information is listed on the back page. Column for self and 5 columns for accompanying members. So if we have more people than there are columns of the back page, again, there's a box to check that there's an additional, and then they can just add a page for that. Trying to get as complete information as possible for age, gender, and ethnicity. Observation allowed for gender, age, and race if the only way to get the info. For race, people should mark all that apply or add other. And ethnicity and disability, other household members, the yes oval needs to be filled out for those. Ages of accompanying members. About children, if they are listed as accompanying, they should literally actually be with the respondent. Homeless household equals people living together, even if unrelated. Mostly a family, not always, but more than just traveling together. Just a reminder that the transgender language was changed in 2017, and this is still in effect with the survey. Gender nonconforming, i.e. not exclusively male or female, and then just trying to train volunteer interviewers to be sensitive to the idea of gender identity in general. Question number 13 was changed from did you leave to are you homeless now for any of the following reasons? And that relates specifically to domestic violence. The intent is to figure out the people who are homeless because of domestic violence and not necessarily anyone who has ever experienced that. About the mini grants. This is just detailing some new steps to the process for the application of the mini grants from DPHHS for the point in time count. So again, new shelter identification is something that we're just trying to keep in people's minds to find out about new things that we need to. Street count and shelter count overlap. Survey deliveries, collections, returns. Some communities tally before returning. This is also not a big issue, but if that, people can just let us know if they want to get a rough count before they send in. Going to go ahead and get started here with the coordinator training for the point in time survey and housing inventory. I know a lot of this material is already familiar to most of you.